These failings, identified by investigators.
The message did not arrive as a declaration, a negotiation, or another carefully worded royal appeal. It came as a final verdict. Behind the guarded walls of Buckingham Palace, a decision was finalized that ended years of uncertainty in a single stroke. Prince Harry and Meghan would never again return to Britain as working members of the royal family. The door they once walked through had now been permanently closed. Before we go deeper into what this really means for the royal family, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss a single update. Courtiers entered expecting another conversation about reconciliation, security, and royal appearances. Instead, they found the final wording waiting on the table. Buckingham Palace, the monarch's main official residence and centre of royal administration, had become the place where uncertainty ended. Years of interviews, accusations, letters, and failed conversations had pushed the dispute beyond family pain. It now threatened trust inside the institution and a monarchy preparing for its next reign. King Charles read the document without speaking. The palace formally confirmed that Harry and Meghan would never return to the United Kingdom in an official royal capacity, would receive no renewed working roles, and would never again be admitted into the monarchy's inner structure. An official royal capacity means serving publicly on behalf of the crown under palace authority. The king kept one hand on the page after everyone else had finished. That pause exposed the truth no announcement could hide. The monarch was approving a ruling against his younger son. Prince William watched from across the table and offered no sign of victory. The future king understood that protecting the crown meant accepting a price. His brother would not stand beside him during the next chapter, and the bond they shared might never recover. William had supported a clear boundary, but clarity did not feel like peace. It felt like loss made official. A private clause made the judgment even stricter. No future monarch could reverse the decision without written approval from the sovereign, the heir, and the Palace Council. The Palace Council was the senior group advising the monarch on household and constitutional matters. That safeguard turned a painful decision into a lasting barrier designed to survive changes of leadership and public pressure. One courtier broke the silence and asked what had forced Charles to stop hoping. The king lifted his hand from the document but did not answer. The truth led back to a private incident the palace had concealed. But before the final document could be understood, the human cost had to be measured through the four people whose choices had brought the monarchy to this irreversible divide. This was never only a dispute between a palace and two former working royals. At its heart stood a father divided from his son, two brothers shaped by the same grief but pulled toward different futures, and a woman who believed leaving Britain was the only way to reclaim her independence. Each carried a different burden. Each believed the other had crossed the line first. And now every private wound had become part of a public decision. Prince Harry had once imagined a lifelong place beside William, sharing the responsibility of duty while helping shape a modern monarchy. Over time, that vision changed. He began to see palace life as a danger to his family, his independence, and his emotional well-being. A working royal is a family member who carries out official duties on behalf of the monarch. But for Harry, that position had started to feel less like service and more like a prison built from traditions he could no longer embrace. Meghan viewed the institution through an equally painful perspective. She had entered believing loyalty would earn protection. Instead, she came to believe the system expected silence, obedience, and sacrifice while leaving her vulnerable. The palace represented tradition to millions, but to her it had become a place where every private emotion could be transformed into public judgment. Leaving Britain had given her control. Yet the final ruling proved that independence had also come with a permanent cost. King Charles remained alone after the council meeting, unable to separate the monarch's duty from the father's memories. He remembered Harry as the young boy who had gripped his hand after Diana's death, trusting him to guide him through unimaginable grief. Now the king had approved an official barrier against that same son. The decision protected the crown, but it cut deeply into the family beneath it. Prince William stood beside a window at Kensington Palace and read the confirmation twice before placing his phone face down. Kensington Palace is the London residence and working base used by senior royals. Yet that morning it brought him no comfort. The future king felt no triumph. His frustration remained, but sorrow weighed even heavier because the ruling secured his future reign while eliminating another opportunity to rebuild the bond with his brother. Catherine studied his expression before quietly asking whether the wording truly had to be permanent. William replied that permanence was the one condition the Palace Council refused to change. The princess understood what he could not bring himself to say aloud. Uncertainty had become more damaging than separation. Harry received advance notice through his legal representatives in California. He stood up without speaking and walked away from a table. Meghan remained seated, held the message firmly, and asked only who had signed it first. The sequence mattered. This decision had not started with William or the council. It had begun after one private exchange between Harry, Charles, and a final invitation to Britain. To understand why every remaining hope disappeared, the story must return to the evening when one last invitation became the point of no return. Months before the palace made its final announcement, one last attempt at reconciliation was quietly organized. There would be no cameras, no public ceremony, and no senior officials inside the room. Charles intended to meet his younger son as a father rather than as the sovereign. Yet the invitation that was supposed to restore communication instead created the moment everyone would later recognize as the true ending. The Knight Trust finally collapsed beyond repair. Charles authorized the meeting at Clarence House and ordered that it remain completely confidential. The London residence served as his private home and working base, but on this occasion it was meant to become neutral ground between a father and son who had spent years communicating through statements, advisors, and public accusations. Harry would be invited during his next visit to Britain. There would be no announcement, no ceremonial responsibility, and no request that he return to royal service. The king designed the meeting as a personal fresh start. He and Harry would speak alone first, with no aides present and no official record of their conversation. If that discussion created even the smallest opening, William would join them later for a shorter meeting. Charles believed removing the institution from the room might finally allow the family beneath it to speak honestly again. For one brief moment, hope returned. Harry considered the invitation, but his written response changed everything. He insisted that Meghan attend every discussion, that an independent recorder document the exchange, and that selected conclusions later receive public acknowledgement from the palace. An independent recorder meant a neutral individual responsible for preserving an exact account of what was said. To the younger prince, those safeguards offered protection after years of conflicting memories and disputed conversations. To his father, they transformed reconciliation into formal evidence. Charles read the conditions alone in his study. When an aide entered, the monarch folded the letter, removed his glasses, and quietly said that a family conversation could not survive if it began as evidence. He understood why Harry feared being misunderstood. Yet he also recognized something even more painful. His son no longer trusted a private promise from him. William learned that the letter contained additional demands. Harry wanted guarantees regarding security, titles, accommodation, and how future public statements would be handled before he agreed to enter the room. The prince read the list twice and warned his father that accepting those terms would turn every personal conversation into a future negotiation. The future king did not oppose peace, but he believed peace built on conditions would collapse at the first disagreement. Charles withdrew the invitation. Harry refused to accept the silence that followed and demanded a direct meeting before leaving Britain again. The king agreed, knowing there would be no recorder, no advisors, and nowhere left for either man to hide. The withdrawn invitation did not end the conflict. It stripped away the last layer of diplomacy and forced father and son into their most painful confrontation. There were no aides inside the room, no private secretaries to soften the language, and no prepared statements to hide behind. This time, every word would belong only to a father and his son. Charles stood beside the fireplace as Harry entered. Both men already understood that the conversation might become their last truly honest exchange. What followed was not a constitutional discussion. It was a father asking for trust, a son demanding accountability, and two wounded men discovering that love alone could no longer bridge the distance between them. Harry had secured only a brief face-to-face meeting during his private visit to Britain, but he arrived determined to explain why he had insisted on formal safeguards. Charles had agreed on one condition. The conversation would remain completely private, and neither man could later use it in interviews, books, legal proceedings, or documentaries. A private secretary is a senior aide who manages a royal figure's official work and communication. Yet none had been allowed inside. This time, every sentence would remain between father and son alone. Harry placed a folded document on the table and kept his hand resting beside it. He said he could not return to the old system without written protection for Meghan because promises had failed before and memories had repeatedly been challenged. Charles looked at the paper but made no move to touch it. The king replied that trust could not be negotiated like a legal agreement, and that a family could not rebuild itself through conditions written before a single honest conversation had even begun. The accusation came almost immediately. Harry argued that the palace had always protected the crown before protecting people, and that every request for silence had left Meghan exposed while the institution remained untouched. His father's composure finally cracked. Charles answered that every public accusation had forced the family to defend itself against someone it still loved. The monarch never raised his voice, but the pain behind his words carried greater weight than anger ever could. Charles then revealed the detail he had kept hidden. Several private messages sent directly to Harry had later appeared in altered form during documented discussions involving advisors outside the family. The king explained that the wording had been changed enough to shift their meaning, convincing him that confidentiality had already been broken. Harry denied authorizing any misuse and insisted he could not control every conversation surrounding him. Yet he refused to cut ties with the advisors his father no longer trusted. Silence filled the room. Charles realized in that moment that the relationship they once shared could no longer be restored because the disagreement was no longer about one letter, one interview, or one condition. It was about two men who no longer shared the same understanding of what trust truly required. Harry walked toward the door, then paused and asked whether William had pushed the palace toward a tougher position. Charles met his eyes and answered quietly, "This time, the decision will be mine." Yet even a king does not close a royal door by himself. Behind Charles stood an entire network of authority that had already concluded reconciliation had become too dangerous. The monarchy rarely reveals how its most significant decisions are made. There are no dramatic votes before cameras and no public courtroom where arguments are heard. Power moves through handwritten notes, private legal opinions, sealed folders, and conversations held in rooms where every chair has been placed for a purpose. Yet behind the ruling on Harry and Meghan stood not an invisible system, but individuals who believed the crown could no longer survive another cycle of departure, accusation, and attempted return. Charles requested separate evaluations from constitutional advisors, security officials, household executives, and representatives of the Prince of Wales. Constitutional advisors are specialists who guide the monarch on duties, limits, and decisions affecting the crown. Their assignment was simple but unforgiving: determine whether Harry and Meghan could ever again function inside the confidential structure required of working royals. No one questioned whether the couple could visit Britain privately. The real issue was whether they could return with access, authority, funding, and a place inside the institution. William entered the decisive council session carrying no personal papers. He listened as each assessment described the risks created by another official return, from divided leadership inside the household to renewed disputes over public statements and security. When one advisor asked whether he supported permanent exclusion from royal duties, the prince paused. Then he replied that the monarchy could not operate without trust. His answer was calm, but the silence that followed revealed how deeply personal the decision had become. Charles studied his elder son's expression and saw the burden awaiting him. The future king would inherit the crown, but he would also inherit every unresolved scar surrounding his brother. The monarch understood that protecting William's future reign meant removing uncertainty now. Yet the father within him knew exactly what that protection would cost. Legal advisors then presented a binding household directive. A household directive is a formal internal order governing how the royal institution operates. The document would block future negotiations over working status, ceremonial representation, royal funding, official residences, and access to confidential briefings. It did not erase Harry from the family, but it closed every remaining path back into official service. The strongest argument came from a sealed security assessment. It concluded that uncertainty itself had become a danger because every possible return created operational conflict, political pressure, and public instability. Each fresh negotiation forced officials to redesign plans around a relationship no one believed would remain stable. Charles waited until everyone had departed. He read the final page once again, lifted the pen, and signed. The decision immediately moved through private channels. Invitations were revised. Residences were reassigned. Security arrangements were updated. Family communication routes became more limited. By the following morning, the ruling was no longer confined to a sealed folder. Its consequences had already begun reshaping lives on both sides of the Atlantic. A royal decision becomes real, not when the ink dries, but when people discover what the words have taken away. In Britain, staff members updated protocols that had remained unchanged for years. In California, two people who had built a new life beyond palace control were confronted with the reality that the path back had disappeared. There would be no restored balcony appearance, no temporary royal position, and no future negotiation waiting behind a change of heart. Palace staff acted swiftly. Harry and Meghan were removed from confidential planning lists covering future state occasions, official family representation, major anniversaries, and emergency succession arrangements. State occasions are major national ceremonies attended by senior royals on behalf of the Crown. Their names had once remained on reserve lists, preserved in case relations improved. Now that possibility had been eliminated. The change mattered because the palace was no longer preparing for reconciliation behind closed doors. Frogmore-related accommodations were also marked as closed rather than suspended. Frogmore had represented the last physical connection to royal life in Britain. While ceremonial access and special household channels had kept a narrow institutional link alive, those remaining ties now ended together. This was not a temporary pause, it was a complete removal. Harry received the final document at his California home and read the paragraph concerning permanent exclusion twice. Then he pushed his chair back so sharply that it struck the floor behind him. The prince remained silent at first. Anger surfaced, but beneath it was something even heavier, the realization that the decision had taken the future out of his hands. Meghan stayed seated and examined the wording with calm focus. She tightened her grip when she reached the clause confirming that no public apology, private reconciliation, or future change of monarch would automatically restore their official status. The Duchess had fought for freedom from palace control. Yet she understood what that sentence truly meant. Independence had become permanent separation. Their advisers pointed to one distinction that changed the emotional weight of the ruling. The palace had not prohibited Harry and Meghan from entering Britain as private individuals. They could visit, meet family members, and return for personal reasons. But they would never again represent the Crown, receive official authority, or step back into the institution they had left. Harry wanted to respond immediately. He began drafting a statement accusing the institution of punishing his family and permanently closing every genuine path to reconciliation. Meghan stopped him. She warned that an emotional response would confirm every concern outlined in the directive and allow the palace to present its restraint as wisdom. Night brought a different decision. Harry dismissed the lawyers, ignored the prepared statement, and made one private phone call. He contacted William directly, without advisers, staff, or legal representatives standing between them. With the machinery of the monarchy finally removed, the two brothers were left alone with one question no adviser could answer. Was anything still worth saving beneath the titles they had lost? For years, almost every conversation between William and Harry had carried an invisible audience. Advisers, lawyers, courtiers, journalists, or the memory of words later repeated in public. This call was different. No statement had been prepared. No aide listened from the next room, and no conditions had been placed on the table. One brother had just secured the future of the monarchy. The other had just lost his final route back into it. At last, they spoke without the institution standing between them. Harry called shortly after midnight in Britain and bypassed every official communication channel. He did not ask to speak as the Duke of Sussex, a title marking his formal place within the royal family. He asked for 10 minutes as a brother. William answered from a private room at Kensington Palace, quietly closed the door, and left Catherine and the staff outside the conversation. For the first time in years, no one stood between them. Harry asked the question immediately. Had his brother wanted the decision to be permanent? William did not hide behind the council or the king. He admitted that he wanted the uncertainty to end because every possible return reopened the same wounds throughout the family. Every discussion created new demands, new anxiety, and another cycle of mistrust. The future king had chosen stability, but he understood that stability had come at his brother's expense. William then confessed something he had avoided saying for years. He no longer knew how to trust Harry within the monarchy. Too many private conversations had become public controversies, and too many attempts at reconciliation had ended in fresh accusations. Yet the prince also admitted that he did not want their children to inherit the bitterness that now separated their fathers. That possibility troubled him more than any newspaper headline. Harry listened in silence before revealing something no adviser had ever heard. He no longer wanted to return as a working royal. What hurt him most was the palace deciding his future on his behalf and making that rejection part of the permanent record. He had chosen to step away, but he had never chosen to have every path back erased forever. That difference mattered because independence felt very different when the other side officially declared that return was no longer possible. William offered the only compromise still remaining. There would be no institutional return, no restored role, and no renewed place inside the working royal household. But private family contact could continue, provided it remained private and free from interviews, legal disputes, or public negotiation. It was not reconciliation. It was a fragile bridge, but it was still a bridge. Harry did not answer immediately. Silence settled between the brothers before he finally said he would think about it. Then he deleted the angry statement his advisors had prepared. That single act of restraint changed everything. When Britain awoke, the monarchy's most decisive family decision entered the public spotlight without the explosion many had expected. But the silence carried its own unmistakable message. By sunrise, the private grief of one family had become the defining royal story across Britain. Broadcasters interrupted scheduled programming. Newspaper editors replaced carefully prepared front pages. Crowds gathered outside palace gates, reading the announcement on their phones while commentators debated whether the crown had protected itself or abandoned the possibility of forgiveness. Yet one image captured the moment more powerfully than any discussion: a closed palace gate beneath a headline declaring that the separation was now permanent. British and international broadcasters presented the confirmation as the definitive end of Harry and Meghan's official royal chapter, not another temporary pause in a dispute that might one day be repaired. Palace representatives emphasized that the decision applied only to official duties and institutional access. Institutional access means permission to enter the monarchy's private working structure, including briefings, planning, and representation on behalf of the Crown. The ruling did not remove Harry's citizenship, prevent private family contact, or legally stop either of them from visiting Britain. But it closed every path back to royal service. Supporters of the couple described the announcement as unnecessarily harsh. They argued that a family should never make rejection permanent, especially when future generations would inherit the consequences. Supporters of the monarchy responded that years of uncertainty had made a firm boundary unavoidable. In their view, the institution could not continue preparing for both separation and return at the same time. The country was no longer debating a single decision. It was debating whether survival required finality. Charles watched the coverage with the sound muted. The king remained motionless as analysts discussed duty, trust, and the future of the crown. Then an old photograph of Harry as a young boy appeared. The monarch quietly turned away. That single gesture revealed what the official statement never could. Institutional certainty had brought him no personal comfort. He had secured the monarchy, but the father had lost something the sovereign could never recover. Outside Buckingham Palace, a small crowd gathered near the Victoria Memorial. Copies of a newspaper passed from hand to hand beneath the front page headline, "The door is closed," printed above a photograph of Harry and Meghan leaving a previous royal ceremony. Some people watched in silence. Others exchanged quiet arguments. The headline felt less like breaking news and more like a final sentence. The expected public response never arrived. Their spokesperson released only a brief official statement confirming that the couple would continue their lives and work independently in the United States. No accusations followed. No demands were made. Their restraint forced the public to confront a deeper reality. With the arguments exhausted and the boundary finally accepted, only one question remained. Not whether they would return, but what this permanent separation would ultimately mean. The palace decision did not create a winner. Charles protected the institution, but sacrificed the hope of welcoming his younger son back into royal life. William secured the future of his reign, but accepted that his brother would never again stand beside him in royal service. Harry gained the independence he had fought for, only to realize that freedom feels different when the road home has been permanently closed. Meghan escaped the system, but the system ultimately delivered the final decision. The ruling permanently separated two identities that had remained connected for years. Harry and Meghan would continue as private international figures, free to build careers and speak in their own voices, while the monarchy remained a closed institution founded on duty, confidentiality, and continuity. Continuity means preserving the structure of the crown from one reign to the next without repeated disruption. Their connection to Britain would continue, but it would now exist as a personal relationship rather than an official one. Charles placed the signed directive inside a private red box before quietly closing the lid. A red box is the secure case used by the sovereign for important state and royal documents. The king showed no sense of triumph. He looked weary because the monarch had protected the institution by making a decision the father within him had never wished to make. Leadership had demanded finality, but finality brought him no peace. Later, William told Catherine that the monarchy could finally move forward without constant uncertainty. The prince believed future planning would no longer be shaped by the possibility of Harry returning under different conditions. She listened before quietly replying that moving forward was not the same as healing. The princess understood that stability could safeguard the crown while still leaving the family deeply wounded. William silently accepted the truth in her words. Harry chose not to challenge the ruling in public. Through a private conversation with William, he accepted the offer of strictly personal family contact, provided neither side used those exchanges in interviews, legal proceedings, or public campaigns. The younger brother gave up every remaining possibility of an official return, but preserved one fragile connection beneath the titles and years of conflict. Meghan and Harry continued building their lives in California as independent public figures. The couple no longer waited for restored royal duties, ceremonial invitations, or a negotiated return. In Britain, the royal household removed their names from future working schedules, confidential briefings, and official representation. The separation was complete, intentional, and permanent. The monarchy survived by closing its doors, but that survival came with a profound human cost. The crown gained certainty. Harry gained complete independence. Charles lost the future he had once imagined with his younger son, while William inherited both stability and sadness. The family lost the shared path they had always believed would remain open. And so the palace door closed, not through revenge or celebration, but with the quiet finality of a family accepting that some departures cannot be undone, only accepted. Charles believed history would judge the decision by whether it protected the monarchy for generations to come. Yet history rarely measures only institutions. It also remembers families, relationships, and the personal sacrifices hidden behind public duty. William understood that becoming king would now mean leading a monarchy without the brother who had once stood beside him through childhood, military service, and unimaginable loss. The future ahead looked more secure, but it also felt lonelier than he had ever expected. Harry moved forward knowing the chapter of official royal service had ended forever. His future would no longer be connected to palace responsibilities, ceremonial appearances, or constitutional obligations. Whatever legacy he created from this point onward would be built entirely on his own decisions. Meghan accepted that their life in California was no longer a temporary alternative to royal life. It had become their permanent direction. The uncertainty that had lingered for years was finally over, even if the emotional consequences would remain. For the royal household, the decision brought operational clarity. Future planning could continue without preparing for possible reconciliations, changing arrangements, or renewed negotiations. The institution had chosen stability over uncertainty. Yet behind every official document, every signed directive, and every carefully written statement remained one undeniable truth. No royal ruling could erase the bond of blood. No constitutional decision could completely silence the memories of a father and his son. The institution had reached its conclusion. The family still had to live with it. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you never miss our latest royal updates. We'll see you in the next video.